a person unstable. Hence, in order to prevent the deadly infection, they are forbidden from sleeping until they find a cure. Meanwhile, Ludmilla calls Driscoll and informs him that Dr. Urish has been acting strangely. As a result, the three immediately rush to the diplomat's house, where they come across Urish in a terrible state. Carol tries taking a picture of him, but suddenly, the monster-like man wakes up and attacks her. However, before any serious damage is caused, Driscoll thwarts Urish, causing him to vomit a weird liquid and die. Following the incident, Carol becomes scared and rushes to retrieve Oliver from her ex-husband. When she reaches the place, she sees Tucker in a meeting with some of his associates. Carol is worried about her son, but Tucker assures her that Oliver is playing at his friend Jean's house. Despite this, she isn't convinced and starts looking for her son, but just then, the men from the meeting surround her. A terrified Carol tries to run, but Tucker effortlessly tackles her to the ground and infects her with his saliva. Fortunately, she somehow manages to escape the house and get into her car. Carol drives recklessly through the neighborhood, resulting in an accident. When she gets out of the car, she is again chased by a group of infected people. But even this time, she evades them and enters a subway station. Shortly after, Carol gets on the train, which is full of passengers with the same vague expressions. Just then, she receives a message from Oliver, who asks her to save him immediately, as Tucker has taken him somewhere. This worries Carol, and when she breaks down in desperation, a passenger tells her to act emotionless if she doesn't want to get caught. Suddenly, a group of infected passengers enter the compartment and start a brawl. They try to subdue Carol, but she somehow manages to exit the train and flee. She then gets back to the road and witnesses some cops forcing the uninfected citizens to be inoculated with the virus. Meanwhile, an uninfected cop notices the sweat on her face and tells her to run, indicating that the infected ones cannot sweat. By this time, the city is turned into a war zone, and several people are committing the unthinkable to save themselves from the virus. In the next scene, Carol rushes over to the Belichick mansion, where Driscoll and Dr. Galliano are still conducting their tests. After a bit of discussion, Driscoll decides to help Carol find her son, while Dr. Galliano and his assistant prepare to travel to Fort Detrick, Maryland, to find a cure for the virus. They also decide to stay awake, fearing that they might have been infected. Later, when Carol and Driscoll head back to the streets, they notice Wendy being forcefully taken away by the cops. When she tries resisting, the infected cops zap her with a stick and knock her out. Despite this, she doesn't turn. Carol and Driscoll notice this and deduce that Wendy has somehow developed an immunity to the virus. After a while, the duo steals a police car and arrives at Carol's office, where they begin searching through Wendy's medical profile. Driscoll finds out that Wendy was suffering from a brain illness called encephalitis, and this is the reason why the virus doesn't want to enter her brain. The virus only tends to attack healthy brains so that it can feast on it and multiply its number. Just then, Carol gets another text from Oliver, mentioning that he is being held at his grandmother's home in Baltimore. Scared, Carol comes clean with Driscoll that she has already been infected with the virus. Despite this, her best friend assures her that everything will be alright. Following this, Driscoll somehow manages to drop Carol off at the train station before the city gets sealed. After sharing an emotional goodbye, the two depart. Then, Carol boards the train to Baltimore, where she unexpectedly runs into Oliver's friend, Jean, who has also been infected. It turns out that he is also heading to meet Oliver. After the train reaches Baltimore, Tucker arrives at the station to escort Carol and Jean to his mother's place. That evening, Tucker gets a call from his associates and heads outside. Taking this as the perfect opportunity, Carol scans through the house and finally finds her son. The two then have an emotional reunion, and Oliver mentions that he is still uninfected despite sleeping every day. Here we get to know that the little boy is taking constant medication for his sleeping disorder, and that is why he isn't infected with the virus. Suddenly, Jean approaches the two and tries to infect them with the virus, but Carol easily swats him away and rushes out with her son. On the way out, Tucker catches wind of the escape and immediately chases after his family. He tracks them inside an abandoned warehouse and tries hurting them, but Carol grabs an iron rod and strikes him in the head, finally killing him. Following this, the mother-son duo enters a pharmacy, where Carol finds an injection and hands it over to her son. She then instructs the boy to inject it into her in case she falls asleep. Meanwhile, she gets a call from Driscoll and informs him about their location. As she is busy on the call, Oliver slowly approaches a door, which has blood splattered nearby it. She immediately stops him and instead enters herself to inspect. There, she notices several infected people lying on the ground and rushes out, but not before grabbing a gun from one of them. A while later, when little Oliver falls asleep, Carol desperately searches for medication and literally anything she can get her hands on to keep her awake. The next morning, the infected people inside the room have come back to life, and they repeatedly knock on the door to get out. This wakes Oliver up, and when he realizes that his mother has fallen asleep, he swiftly injects her with the syringe, saving her life. But the danger is far from averted. The infected people inside the room continue banging on the door ferociously. Just when it seems that all hope is lost, Driscoll arrives at the location. Carol is ecstatic to see him, but when she finds out that he too has become infected, she backs away from him. Driscoll keeps mentioning that the virus has made him more powerful, and he now feels invigorated. He also tries persuading Carol to join him, mentioning that the new society will have no problems, such as crime, hatred, discrimination, and so on. A terrified Carol points her gun at him, but Driscoll still opens the door and lets out all the other infected people. Then, he mentions that the infected people hate the immune ones, pointing at Oliver. Saying this, everyone tries to apprehend the little boy, but Carol shoots and kills them one by one. When it's Driscoll's turn, she simply shoots him in the leg and escapes with Oliver. Outside, they steal a police car and narrowly avoid several infected people. While driving around haphazardly, Carol gets a call from Dr. Galliano, who tells her to come to a building where a chopper is ready to take off. Following the instructions, Carol somehow reaches the place with Oliver, and finally, they are saved. In the final scene, we are shown that scientists have finally created a vaccine for the deadly virus. Because of this, the virus has been eradicated from the entire world, and life has become normal again. Dr. Galliano, who is one of the driving forces behind the vaccine, reveals in an interview that the vaccinated people will have no memories of the earlier events. Meanwhile, Carol has adopted Jean, and she is now in a relationship with Driscoll. The movie ends as Oliver and Jean head to school, while Driscoll reads a newspaper, completely unaware of the heroism that he showed a year earlier. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.